Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is Ukraine War News Update, first part thereof for the 18th of September 2023. Apologies if I'm a bit befuddled today. I've got primary progressive multiple sclerosis, as most of you know. I had my 6th COVID jab yesterday, and that about 50% of the booster jabs I've had make my MS go mental just for like the night that I've had it. So I had delirious sleep last night, and this is how cool I am. So I had delirious dreams, hardly any sleep, just in and out, and instead of having like really cool dreams, action-packed or maybe a little bit saucy or anything like this, no, I dream about ranked choice voting and the difficulty Trump was having in some kind of imaginary election. And I was interviewing loads of media people who were misreporting stuff. And I wake up in the morning, I'm a bit nuts at the moment. And why can't I have cool dreams? So it turns out I'm just not very cool. Anyway, you don't need to know any of that. Let's get to the Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply. You can find them in my description below to this video. Right, a bit of an uptick yesterday in terms of personnel. We saw a low number, and that could be because yesterday was Sunday. We do see this at the weekend, sometimes even on Monday as a kind of carryover from the Sunday, but sometimes not. It's a bit. Occasionally there are dips that can be explained by the weekend. 620 personnel lost. That could be an uptick due to Klishchivka, Andriivka, or not, I don't know. 3 tanks, 6 armored personnel vehicles. That's slightly lower than we have seen. 24 artillery pieces. That's back up to yesterday was a slightly lower day, but still something like, I don't know, 19 or so, or in the teens. 24 is going to be a significant loss to the Russians. As I said previously, Dom Nichols from Ukraine, the latest podcast, was talking to an analyst that said, take 20% off these numbers, and that's pretty accurate. Of course, I have no idea the provenance of that claim. Nonetheless, he seemed to think that was a realistic kind of reliable rule of thumb. 2 anti-aircraft warfare systems. The Ukrainians have been able to attrit quite a few of them from the Russian infantry. 27 drones and 7 cruise missiles. That won't be from last night, but the night before. We'll come on to that from last night. 34 vehicles and fuel tanks is a heavy loss for the Russians. There's no doubt about that, to their logistics capabilities. And 5 pieces of special equipment. I've seen some more ISR, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance equipment taken out yesterday. A big mast with some stuff on. So that happens on a daily basis. There you go. I think that's another difficult day for the Russians, although not as many tanks and APVs. Nonetheless, this is going to be hurting. We go to Andrew Perpetua, the map I rely on, who surveys the video footage and imagery that he sees on a daily basis and tots them up. This is what we see. So about a 2-to-1 ratio, Russian to Ukrainian losses. And of the Russian losses, we've got pretty much consistent split across all those categories: artillery, tanks, IFVs, trucks. Of the tanks, you got 3 tanks, T-72, and then 2 kind of unknown tanks. But yeah, nothing of crazy high value there. As far as the Ukrainians are concerned, counter battery radar taken out by a Lancet, although it might have been a decoy. If it's the real McCoy, then it is a sore loss for the Ukrainians, but it might not be. And then quite a bit of logistic stuff, really. Not huge losses for the Ukrainians outside of that radar. So that gives you a bit of a sense of what might have taken place yesterday. And then it's kind of looking at some of the details and claims of, particularly around Andriivka and Klishchivka, where it's been supposedly pretty challenging for the Russians in terms of heavy losses, but then the comeback from the Russians is like, have you seen the size of Andriivka? You're not going to have heavy losses there. But then actually, when you see the number of foxholes, the whole of the landscape there is littered with places like this where the Russians can hang out. And we've seen there's so much video footage coming out. So reporting from Ukraine had a whole video on this last night. I'm talking about there's one instance where the Russians had surrendered to Ukrainian forces and they were just being kind of rounded up. And then the Russians hit that position with artillery. Didn't hit the Ukrainians, hit their own troops, and apparently sort of purposefully, you're not going to surrender to the Ukrainians. We're going to take you out before you do that. Just incredible. Anyway, here we've got a claim. Maxim Zhurin, Deputy Commander of the 3rd Assault Brigade, so these are guys who liberated Andriivka from the Bakhmut area, has used his Telegram channel to post a video with the message that, quote, destruction of enemy personnel is one of our priority tasks. In the battles for Andriivka, the Russians lost not only territory, but also a lot of their men. Lately, they have started to use all available reserves in this area. Sometimes they do not have time to live for a couple of hours, and new meat was immediately sent to replace them. The video of the 2nd Assault Battalion of the 3rd Assault Brigade shows only a small part of the destroyed Russians. Those bodies are lying around among the garbage and no one will take them away. In the reporting from Ukraine video, they talk about how, or he talks about how the Ukrainians call Klishchivka stinky. That's their name for it because it smells and you can smell it from 2 kilometers away because of all the dead bodies. It's just not cleared. There's just that many of them. So, you know, things are not good there. And also the Russians, the 72nd and the 31st, I think, the brigades working for the Russians in that area have lost not only a lot of their troops, but also some high-ranking commanders as well, and officers. So it's not good. Both units, we have, for example, we have one here, Colonel and Brigade Commander of the 31st Guards Air Assault Brigade, Russian Airborne Forces, was killed. You know, and he's a high-ranking officer, another very senior officer in Russia's armed forces. Colonel Andriy Dunaya Kondrashkin, commander of the Amphibious Assault Brigade. He's the 74th colonel to die in Putin's war. More than 600 of rank major or above have been killed. And you add that to the ones lost for the 72nd as well, and it's not been good. Right, talking about general equipment loss. I mean, here's a Ka-52 attack helicopter being spotted in Kerch in Crimea. Now, this looks like one that's not been taken out on the front lines, but might have crashed behind the lines. So just adding that as a maybe this has happened. As commented by specialists in aviation, quote, there's probably an emergency landing due to combat damage or technical failure, so it might have been hit. Judging by the serious nature of the damage on the bottom of the fuselage, it will be extremely difficult to repair this helicopter, even at a specialized repair plant. Anyway, just thought I'd add that one in. It could be another helicopter to add to the list, or it could be one that's already been totted up. And then we have Yekaterinburg in Russia, another example of Russia on fire, and another significant fire as well. The industrial zone of Yekaterinburg, polymer materials are burning, and according to eyewitnesses, rescuers are moving barrels with flammable substances. The area of the fire is 250 square meters. And actually, I should add, I probably have got this in the wrong place, but this is another example of Russia on fire, where we have a big old Z swastika, if you like, or Z sign in Belgrade, and someone sets it on fire, just walks up behind it, sets it on fire, and it catches alight. It doesn't actually do too much damage to it. I think other drivers come along, so he runs away. Other drivers come along and then sort of put it out. The kind of fast forwards here and gets out some extinguishers and puts it out. But so that's interesting that in Belgrade you've got someone that takes umbrage to that sign. One presumes that's a Russian doing that rather than a Ukrainian living there. So Russia on fire in a few different contexts there. Okay, moving on to distance strikes. Russia has launched a big drone and missile strike last night. So exactly what I said would happen has happened. So 2 nights ago, there were a number of cruise missiles that were sent and had this really snaking path across Ukraine. And I was saying it looks very much like they're sounding out air defenses, and you're going to get in the next 24 hours or so a much bigger attack using missiles and drones. And then indeed, the very next night, that's exactly what happened. So it is, they are working to some kind of plan here. It's fairly sensible. I mean, it's what the Ukrainians have done to the Russians as well. You send out these almost sacrificial missiles or drones just to find out where the enemy air defenses are. Anyway, Russia launched a big drone and missile attack overnight. A total of 18 out of 24 Shahed drones were destroyed. So that's 6 getting through. That's still going to cause, obviously, quite a bit of damage for the Ukrainians. Destroyed, they were aiming for Odessa and Mykolaiv. Additionally, all still 17 cruise missiles were shot down, so KH-55, 101, 555. So that's good news that the Ukrainians are able to take 100% of the cruise missiles out, but actually struggling somewhat more with the Shahed drones that are still a thorn in the side for the Ukrainians. Tim White posts here, in Odessa region, again, the Danube port of Izmail was hit. The governor says 11 attack drones were shot down in his region. However, quote, a hit on the recreational infrastructure of Vilkovo was recorded. A subsequent fire was quickly extinguished. No casualties were reported. So still aiming for that area down to here, down in, where are we? Ismail, the Danube River coming in. You've got Reni and Ismail there are consistently targeted by the Russians, as that is where the Ukrainians are now exporting a lot of their grain up the Danube through Romania and out into Europe. Okay, let's move on to this. Now, explosion occurred in the area of Cape Violet in occupied Sevastopol area. I'm not sure. I'm sure someone was saying actually that picture or that bit of footage, it's actually old footage, but it was nonetheless here. Fire started in the center of Sevastopol. I don't know if that's a separate incident to Sevastopol incidents. Earlier, it was reported about explosions in the city. Now, this is quite significant as far as I can work out, and fits in with a pattern that we've seen over the last few weeks of taking out air defense systems and radar capabilities on the western cape of Crimea. The explosion in Sevastopol, says Flash News, are a joint special operation of the GSD and the Navy, according to the media. Quote, on Cape Violet, where the explosion was heard, the 26th Marine Radio Technical Detachment is based. Also, there's a radio technical station with 12 radar antennas. So there you go. That could well be what was being targeted by the Ukrainians as they're trying to take out the air defense capabilities of the Russians. Preliminary explosion in the area of the radio electronic reconnaissance unit, or an air defense unit. They are located nearby. And then Sevastopol has a problem with explosions tonight. We had some sort of messaging coming out from Russian Telegram channels. We heard a big bang maybe 3 or 4 minutes ago, strong bang, so on and so forth. Sevastopol claps continue. We remain calm and wait for official information, so on and so forth. Rebar fears an airborne assault on Crimea might be underway from Odessa by Ukrainian special forces. I don't know if that actually happened. I doubt it. But explosions are reported simultaneously in different areas of Crimea yesterday evening, with the most spectacular in Sevastopol, near a likely Russian military base. Some Ukrainian media referring to anonymous sources claiming that the explosion in Sevastopol is a result of the joint work between the SBU and the Ukrainian Navy. A possible target, among other things, a large stock of air defense missiles. Local chat indicates that it was likely a drone hitting Cape Violet. Fire in the center of Sevastopol, reportedly. Also, a report of explosions in the area of Violenskoye Highway. There is a Russian air defense military unit there, armed with the S-400 Triumph air system. They seem to have quite a few of these S-400s operating in Crimea. I mean, that's obviously, Crimea is kind of the jewel in the crown for the Russians, isn't it? And it's all about, really, this whole war, I think, really centers around Crimea and Sevastopol. And so we are seeing the Ukrainians gradually degrade the Russian air defense capability across Crimea, so that, you know, one imagines they can hit Sevastopol with something of impunity, and really render the whole of Crimea problematic for the Russians to remain there. And they can do that, as I mentioned over the last few days, they can do that without having to get remotely close to Crimea. I mean, if they can just keep doing these with Storm Shadow missiles and scouts, and then if they get given ATACMS, you can imagine that Crimea is going to become a bit of a nightmare for the Russians. Okay, Mayor of Melitopol, Ivan Fedorov, reports that explosions are reported in occupied Tokmak. That's not unusual. It's pretty much within artillery range, especially when you consider some of the artillery. So I was looking at some footage of a Panzer Howitzer 2000, the German self-propelled gun that the Ukrainians have use of. and they were loading in a particular shell into it that had a 50-kilometer range. So they're thinking, goodness me, if you've got 50-kilometer range, then man, you can pop your Panzerhausen 2000 way back there, and you can still hit Tokmak. So Tokmak can get hit by artillery is my general point there. Right. Okay. In order to preserve undamaged ships, Russia has begun to disperse and hide them as far away as from Crimea as possible. Serhiy Prechuk, a spokesperson for the Odessa military administration, has said. Now, there's talk about, where did I see it? Was it in one of Perun's videos or somewhere else, saying that, you know, when you're talking about the calculus for whether it's worth using X ordnance to hit target Y, right? So you're using a Storm Shadow missile to hit this thing here, and if you do the simple like maths of saying, well, the Storm Shadow missile costs $1 million, I'm making stuff up here, right? And the target costs only like $50,000. Like, is that worth it? But what you also need to understand, it's not just the value of the stuff you're hitting, but the value of the behavioral changes that you're making with the Russian armed forces. So in the case of this, we have, you know, yeah, it was actually very high value targets hit in Sevastopol, but it's not just totting up the value of the boat that was hit and the submarine that was hit, but it's also understanding how much of an issue that is for the Russian Navy, and now they're having to move, and you can't put a price on that, but it's tactically or strategically really important. You know, if they're having to move their ships and assets out of Sevastopol to, you know, faraway places in the Black Sea, and then that renders them less able to, you know, fire cruise missiles at Ukraine, then actually that's a really significant outcome. So sometimes it's worth looking at what the knock-on effects to any given military action are. Anyway, just sort of throw that one in there. A drone exploded during its inspection by Russian guards. The drone was found by local residents near Voronezh. Russian media traditionally writes that there were no casualties as a result of the explosion. So they're expecting it as a big explosion, and no one's hurt, because, I don't know, they're expecting it with a really long go-go gadget arm or something. I don't know. Anyway, that's happened. Right, moving on to other bits and pieces. We'll go to Kirilo Budanov, actually, really interesting interview. Mainly, I'm just going to dwell on Budanov and Zelensky now. They've been involved in a couple of interviews. Budanov, who's the head of intelligence, you'll know him, should know him by now. This is in The Economist, really good interview, an interview with the head of Ukraine's defense intelligence. I could have highlighted the entire thing, so let's try and get through this. Facts, not discussion, are what motivates Lieutenant General Kirilo Budanov. The slow pace of advance against a dug-in and well-prepared enemy is simply a reflection of reality. He does not understand those who predicted a quick collapse of the Russian lines. Quote, is a pencil strong or weak? It depends on how you look at it. The counteroffensive is ongoing. Ukraine still has time. There is more than a month before the muddy season sets in. And that's a fact, he says. Ukraine may already have drawn on limited numbers of its reserve troops, but Russia is now, in seeming desperation, known to be committing understrength reserves that it had not planned to deploy until late October. Quote, contrary to what the Russian Federation declares, it has absolutely no strategic reserve. This is something I've been saying, and Budanov is saying this quite openly, and I have no reason to disbelieve him, the general says. Russia's 25th Combined Arms Army, now being prematurely deployed in the eastern front around Liman and Kupiansk, has only 80% of the manpower and 55% of the equipment it was supposed to have, he says. Quote, human resources in Russia are, relatively speaking, unlimited. In other words, the ability to draft men from, predominantly men from Russia is, relatively speaking, unlimited. He says, but the quality is low. But the quantity is sufficient. As far as other components of the war effort are concerned, Russian resources are being exhausted and a reckoning is coming. Russia's economy will hold out until 2025, he says. The flow of weapons will dry up in 2026, perhaps earlier. He asserts, though the evidence to support his claims is patchy. I suggest you go and watch Perun's latest video from Saturday, which is about Russian arms production capabilities. Really good video. The TLDR of the video is basically they are producing stuff, but it's not sufficient production at sufficient production rate. They need to produce more to keep up with what they're losing. So I mean, it's nothing you wouldn't have known, but he puts a lot of meat on the bones and looks at how to evaluate the statistics and whatnot. Anyway, the spice chief concedes that Ukraine risks running down its own resources too. Quote, "We are dependent on external players. Russia is mostly dependent on itself. A long war is therefore dangerous for Ukraine because it exhausts not only its domestic resources but also those of Western backers." I don't know that sentence is particularly works. Like, I don't know it's any more dangerous for Ukraine because it exhausts Western backers. I think it's less dangerous for Ukraine. If they had to rely on themselves, they'd be screwed. And actually, Russia only being able to rely on themselves is a real challenge for them. So I'd actually think it's the opposite to what he said there. Anyway, he says, so Budanov, he says he has good intelligence about political realities in the West. Quote, "It is still absolutely undecided how long the West will be able to maintain a sufficient supply of resources to us." He says, "Warehouses in Western countries are not completely empty, no matter what anyone says. We can see this very clearly as an intelligence agency." Following decades of underinvestment, corruption and sabotage, Ukraine is slowly ramping up its own domestic arms production. One focus is drones and long-range missiles, weapons that can strike deep behind the front lines. The world last week was given a glimpse of Ukraine's new capabilities with a series of strikes by missiles and drones on ships, a submarine, dry docks and air defences in Crimea. Lieutenant General Budanov's HUR, that's the intelligence services, is playing a leading role in such attacks. Quote, "Drones will definitely make the operations to liberate the territories easier. Drones have no fear. You don't feel sorry for them." There are three main objectives, so this is really important. There are three main objectives for Ukraine's new drone campaign against Russia. 1, to exhaust Russia's air defense systems. 2, to disable military transport and bombers. 3, to damage military production facilities, such as its recent operation that hit a factory producing rocket fuel in Tver region, just north of Moscow. Quote, "We want to get them out of their comfort zone." A secondary aim is psychological, seeding disquiet among the population and disrupting normal economic process inside Russia. The closure of big airports in St. Petersburg and Moscow has, for example, become an almost daily occurrence. And he actually goes on to talk about, striking into Russia, that we haven't killed any civilians. But I think he makes a good point, actually. So going back to the Second World War, like, we almost accept it as like, well, that was part of war, that the British bombed the shit out of Dresden, right, destroying all those civilians. And then I've talked before about the nuclear strikes or the atom bomb strikes on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and then the firebombing of the rest of the Japanese cities by the Americans. Like, absolutely terrible destruction of civilians, and yet we're going, oh, I don't want those weapons to be used within Russia. And you're like, have you seen your own history? So there's an interesting moral debate to be had there about, and I kind of said this in yesterday's, I know, sorry about the technical issues, but right at the beginning, before Rick the Ukrainian came onto my live stream, I had a little chat about this. There is no hard and fast rule. There is no objective rule out there as to what's right and what's wrong for you to do in war. It's for us to discuss this thing and make moral arguments either way. And there's just a big grey zone, and some people agree that that's fine, and other people won't agree that's fine. But no one's actually completely objectively right or wrong. We just have to argue these things and present cases to each other that have more sort of rational justification or less, and and we adhere to hopefully what's more rational. But these are difficult arguments to have. The problem with humans is we love certainty. We're not very good at dealing with uncertainty. So when you say, oh, this area is a right big moral grey zone, you're like, oh, I don't like that. I'd like to be told or to really clearly understand what's right and what's wrong. And actually, life ain't like that. Life is just a big argument with everyone else about what's right and what's wrong. Where you take abortion in the US, you take gun rights in the US. No one's right, no one's wrong. Like, objectively, there's just like, we've got to argue this, and do you know what? We might get to the end of a couple of days of you and me arguing about this, and we're still no closer to where we were when we started. That's life, and we don't like that. We love that kind of certainty of just the clarity of black and white. Yeah, I get that. That's right. That's wrong. When you go to look at the overall picture of Russia, I think it is quite easy to see that there is a kind of black and white there. There is a like Russia are the bad guys, Ukraine are the good guys, and I think that is far easier to ascertain. But when you go into the finer details, like is it right to go and make this strike within Russia? It's like okay, this is going to be a bit of a tricky argument. Right, going on to Zelensky. So he's had an interview on 60 Minutes. This part is in English, or it's dubbed, but the next one isn't. So I can only just read you a little bit of it. I'd love to hear this all. So anyway, here is a bit of Zelensky. Make sure I've got that on loud enough for you. Right.
You have about 6 weeks of good weather left, and I wonder after that point, will the front be frozen in place?
We need to liberate our territory as much as possible and move forward. Even if it's less than half a mile or 100 yards, we must do it. We can't lose time. Forget about the weather and the like. In places that we can't get through in an armored vehicle, let's fly. If we can't fly, let's send drones. We mustn't give Putin a break. If the front is stationary, Ukrainian drones have vaulted into Russia itself, hitting the Kremlin, warplanes, and Moscow high-rises.
And this goes to exactly what I've just been talking about with you.
Officially, Ukraine does not acknowledge these attacks.
The drone strikes in Russia are being done on your orders?
No.
Not on your orders.
Plausible deniability. No. Not really.
Well, you know.
How is this happening?
You know we don't shoot at the territory of the Russian Federation. We decided to try the question another way.
What message is being sent with these drone strikes in Russia?
You do know that we use our partners' weapons on the territory of Ukraine only, and this is true. But these are not punitive operations, such as they carry out, killing civilians. But Russia needs to know that wherever it is, whichever place they use for launching missiles to strike Ukraine, Ukraine has every moral right to send a response to those places. We are responding to them, saying, your sky is not as well protected as you think.
So that's one of the big messages from striking in deep into Russia and Russian territory, is to say, hey, your sky isn't as well protected as you think. And of course, that's going to mean that they're going to be using a lot of their air defense assets and bring them into position in Russia rather than being able to take them to Ukraine and use them there. And of course, that's good for the Ukrainians, so on and so forth. Here we have Zelensky saying, we want to break the Russian line of defense so much. It's not an easy way. I'm confident that it will happen. I can't say where faster. I can't talk about it because I know where we're going to break the line and break it hard. So interesting. I've been wondering about this, like how much Ukraine has in reserve. So we still haven't seen Abrams. We still haven't seen Challenger, really. We still haven't seen an awful lot of equipment. There's the Polish APCs. There's a lot of Strikers still to be used. A lot of AMX. The French tank, light tank. There's a lot of equipment that has not been thrown at the front lines. And I think they're waiting for something significant to do a big explosive attack. But it's just what that is and where it is, we don't know. But he knows. So there is evidently a plan. And it is, although there's going to be a lot of reaction for the Ukrainians reacting to any given situation on the front line and say, okay, we can exploit here, found a weakness here, that kind of deep battle doctrine. But there's also this situation like, yeah, we know where we're going to attack. We know what it is that we want to get, where it is we want to get to. And when we get there and we break that line in that place, then all hell's going to let loose. And that's interesting, I think, to know that, and elucidated there, I think, by Zelensky. Anyway, thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share. I will get back to you very soon with part 2 of this news update.